Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of humanity's first deep space vessel and watched the stars through the main screen. His ship carried the hopes of an entire planet as it traveled beyond the solar system for the first time. The crew had been in space for 3 months now, and everyone felt excited about what they might find out here among the distant suns. Navigator Lisa Grant checked her instruments and called out coordinates to the helm. She had spent years training for this mission and knew every star chart by heart. Chief Engineer Ryan Brooks monitored the experimental engines that Dr. Amy Carter had designed back on Earth. These engines could push their ship faster than anything humans had ever built before. The mission was simple in theory, but complex in practice. Find other intelligent life and make peaceful contact. Earth's leaders wanted to join the galactic community they hoped existed out here. They had prepared gifts of art and music and science to share with whatever civilizations they might encounter. The alarm sounded suddenly, and Lisa's instruments lit up with new contacts. 3 massive ships appeared on their sensors, and they were unlike anything in Earth's databases. The vessels were enormous compared to the human ship, and their design looked both beautiful and threatening at the same time. Jake ordered his communications officer to send the prepared first contact message. It was a simple greeting in mathematics and basic physics that any spacefaring species should understand. The message included peaceful intentions and a request for dialogue. The response came quickly, but not in the form they expected. A beam of energy struck their ship and somehow passed right through their shields without causing damage. Instead, it seemed to scan every part of their vessel and crew. Lisa reported that the alien ships were moving closer and surrounding them. New signal reached their communications array, and the ship's computer worked to translate it. The voice that emerged spoke in perfect English, though with a strange accent that sounded like crystal bells ringing. The speaker identified himself as War Prime Kethavar of the Zephyrian Empire. The alien leader's words chilled everyone on the bridge. He spoke of humans as if they were insects that had wandered into his territory. The Zephyrians had apparently learned Earth's languages from their scan, and Kethavar used this knowledge to deliver his demands with cruel precision. Jake tried to explain that humans came in peace and wanted only to trade and learn. He offered to share Earth's culture and science with these advanced beings. The response was harsh laughter that sounded like breaking glass through the speakers. Kethavar explained that the Zephyrian Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds and enslaved dozens of species. He found it amusing that humans thought they could negotiate as equals. In his view, humans were just another primitive species that existed only to serve their betters. The War Prime's offer was simple and terrible. Humans could surrender immediately and become workers in Zephyrian mining colonies. They would be allowed to live as long as they remained useful. Any resistance would result in the complete destruction of Earth and every human in the galaxy. Jake felt his crew's eyes on him as he considered their options. The alien ships were clearly more advanced than anything Earth could build. Their weapons could probably destroy the human vessel in seconds. But something deep inside him rebelled against the idea of surrendering his entire species to slavery. He asked for time to consider the offer, and Kethavar granted him 1 hour. The alien commander seemed to enjoy watching humans struggle with their hopeless situation. He made it clear that this was not a negotiation, but a simple choice between slavery and death. During that hour, Jake consulted with his senior officers. Lisa suggested they could return to Earth and warn everyone about the threat. Ryan thought they might be able to escape using the ship's experimental systems, but they all knew that running away would only delay the inevitable. Dr. Amy Carter's shield technology had protected them from the alien scan better than expected. The Zephyrians had detected their ship, but seemed unable to penetrate all of their defenses. This gave Jake a small hope that Earth might be able to resist if given enough warning and time to prepare. When the hour ended, Jake gave his answer. He told Kethavar that humans would never accept slavery and that they chose to return to Earth to defend their world. The alien leader's amusement turned to anger at this unexpected defiance. The Zephyrian ships opened fire, but the human vessels' shields held longer than anyone had predicted. Ryan pushed the engines beyond their design limits while Lisa plotted a course back toward Earth. The ship shook under alien weapons fire, but somehow managed to break away from the ambush. As they fled toward home, Jake noticed something disturbing on his sensors. One of the Zephyrian ships had fired a small object that attached itself to their hull before they escaped. The aliens were now tracking them back to Earth. Kethvar's final transmission followed them into space. He promised that the Zephyrian Third Fleet would follow soon to claim Earth and punish humanity for their foolish pride. He called humans soft-flesh parasites who would learn to regret their defiance. The journey home took 2 months, and every day Jake wondered if they were leading destroyers to their world. But he also knew that Earth needed to know what was coming. Humanity would have to choose between fighting impossible odds or accepting a fate worse than death. War Prime. Kethvar stood in his command chamber and studied the intelligence reports about the primitive world called Earth. 6 months had passed since the encounter with the human vessel, and his scouts had been busy gathering information about this new species that dared to refuse Zephyrian rule. The reports confirmed what he already suspected about these soft creatures. Earth had no unified military command, and their weapons were laughably primitive. Their largest ships could barely leave their own star system, and most still used chemical rockets for propulsion. The humans had no energy weapons, and their armor was made from simple metals. Kethvar's military advisors estimated that Earth's entire defensive capability could be destroyed in less than 6 hours. The planet had several billion inhabitants, but they were scattered across multiple nations that could barely cooperate even when facing extinction. Intelligence drones had observed humans fighting each other over resources and territory even as they tried to prepare for invasion. On Earth, General Patricia Kane worked day and night to build humanity's first unified defense force. She had been chosen to lead the Unified Defense Command after Captain Morrison's ship returned with news of the Zephyrian threat. The governments of Earth had finally agreed to work together, but 6 months was not enough time to overcome centuries of division. Admiral Chris Murphy commanded what passed for humanity's space fleet. He had 50 ships of various sizes and capabilities, but none were designed for combat against advanced alien technology. Most were converted cargo vessels and research ships fitted with whatever weapons Earth's factories could produce in the available time. Dr. Kevin Walsh led the scientific effort to understand and counter Zephyrian technology. His team had studied every piece of data from Captain Morrison's encounter, but the aliens were thousands of years ahead of human science. The best they could do was try to reverse engineer the few scanner readings they had captured. The Zephyrian Third Fleet assembled at a staging point just outside Earth's solar system. 300 warships of various classes prepared for what their commanders considered a routine conquest operation. The fleet included massive dreadnoughts that could destroy cities with single shots and smaller vessels designed to hunt down any humans who tried to escape. Kethvar broadcast his final ultimatum to Earth from his flagship. The message reached every communication device on the planet and was translated into every human language. He gave humanity 24 hours to surrender unconditionally or face complete annihilation. No negotiation would be accepted, and no mercy would be shown to those who resisted. The response from Earth's leaders surprised the Zephyrian commander. Instead of desperate pleas for mercy or frantic attempts to negotiate, he received a simple message from General Kane. Humanity rejected the ultimatum and would defend their world regardless of the odds against them. Lieutenant Maria Santos prepared her fighter squadron for what everyone knew would be a suicide mission. Her pilots were volunteers who understood they would not survive the coming battle, but refused to surrender without fighting. They had trained for months in tactics designed to cause maximum damage to enemy ships, even if it meant sacrificing their own lives. Sergeant Tony Rodriguez briefed his Marine units on boarding procedures they had developed for fighting inside alien vessels. The tactics were theoretical, since no human had ever seen the interior of a Zephyrian ship, but the Marines were ready to test their ideas in combat. They carried explosive charges and close combat weapons designed to work in zero gravity. Civilian. Engineer Helen Wright worked around the clock to convert mining equipment into weapons that could damage alien ships. Her teams had turned asteroid mining lasers into crude but powerful energy weapons and modified construction mechs into combat units. Every piece of heavy machinery on Earth was being weaponized. The Zephyrians monitored human communications and found them puzzling. Instead of panic and desperation, they detected grim determination and anger. Humans seemed to understand they were going to die, but showed no signs of changing their minds about resistance. This behavior did not match any patterns in Zephyrian databases. Kethvar consulted with his intelligence officers about human psychology, but none could explain why an inferior species would choose extinction over submission. Every other race the Empire had conquered had eventually seen reason when faced with overwhelming force. Even the most warlike species had surrendered when shown the futility of resistance. The 24-hour deadline passed without any change. In Earth's position, General Kane's final message to the Zephyrian fleet was broadcast on all frequencies so every human on Earth could hear it. She told her people that they would fight with everything they had and never bow to alien masters, no matter what the cost. Dr. Walsh activated the defensive satellites that had been deployed in secret around Earth's orbital space. These weapons used modified versions of Dr. Carter's shield technology to create energy barriers that might slow down the Zephyrian advance. The satellites were hidden among legitimate communication and weather monitoring stations. Admiral Murphy divided his small fleet into 3 groups with different tactical assignments. One group would engage the enemy head-on to buy time for civilian evacuations. Another would attempt hit-and-run attacks on the flanks of the alien formation. The third group was held in reserve for a desperate final assault on the Zephyrian command ship. Captain Lucy Davis volunteered to lead the most dangerous mission of all. Her destroyer had been modified with ramming equipment and maximum explosive charges. If the opportunity arose, she would attempt to crash her ship directly into whatever vessel appeared to be commanding the enemy fleet. The Zephyrian ships moved into Earth's solar system with confident precision. Their formation was designed to intimidate as much as to ensure tactical superiority. Kethvar wanted the humans to see their doom approaching and have time to regret their foolish choice. As the alien fleet approached Earth, the humans made their final preparations. Families said goodbye to loved ones heading into battle. Children were moved to the deepest shelters available, while adults took up whatever weapons they could find. Everyone understood that this might be humanity's last day, but nobody suggested surrender. Kethvar opened a final communication channel to Earth and offered one last chance for the humans to reconsider. He promised that surrender now would result in better treatment for the survivors. The response came not from Earth's leaders, but from ordinary citizens broadcasting on every available frequency their rejection of alien rule. The first human fighters launched from their carriers as Earth's sun rose over the Pacific Ocean. Commander Steve Phillips led 200 small craft in what appeared to be a hopeless charge against the massive Zephyrian dreadnoughts. The alien ships were each larger than entire human cities and bristled with weapons that could vaporize fighters with single shots. Kethvar watched the approaching human attack with amusement. The primitive craft moved in loose formations that violated every principle of space combat his people had developed over millennia. Their weapons were chemical rockets and simple energy beams that would barely scratch Zephyrian armor. He decided to let his gunners practice their accuracy on these flying targets. What happened next shocked every alien observer. The human fighters did not attempt to engage in traditional combat, but instead used tactics that seemed to come from some primitive predator's playbook. They attacked in coordinated groups that struck multiple targets simultaneously, then scattered before the Zephyrians could respond effectively. Steve Phillips had studied every piece of data about Zephyrian ships and identified their weakness. The aliens built their vessels for maximum intimidation and firepower, but their point defense systems were designed to handle conventional attacks. Human fighters were small enough and fast enough to exploit gaps in the alien defensive fire. The Zephyrians discovered that humans fought like no other species they had encountered. When fighter pilot Janet Miller's craft was damaged, she did not retreat or eject, but instead rammed her burning ship into the sensor array of a Zephyrian cruiser. Her final transmission was a battle cry that other human pilots took up as they pressed their own attacks. Captain Lucy Davis received the signal she had been waiting for and ordered her destroyer forward at maximum speed. Her ship had been stripped of everything except engines and the largest explosive charge human science could create. The crew knew this was a one-way mission, but every person aboard had volunteered for the assignment. The Zephyrian gunners focused their fire on the approaching destroyer, but found their targeting systems disrupted by something they had never encountered before. Dr. Walsh's hidden satellites had activated quantum disruptors that interfered with alien sensors and communications. The technology was crude but effective enough to create confusion in the enemy formation. Lucy's ship took massive damage as it closed with the Zephyrian command vessel, but somehow continued forward. When the destroyer's engines finally failed, she was close enough to complete her mission. The explosion that followed was visible from Earth's surface and completely destroyed the alien flagship along with Lucy's entire crew. War Prime Kethvar survived the destruction of his command ship, but found himself aboard a backup vessel with limited communications. For the first time in his military career, he faced an enemy that seemed willing to trade their lives for minimal tactical advantages. This behavior was not just unexpected, but completely outside Zephyrian understanding of rational warfare. The most disturbing discovery came when Zephyrian boarding parties attempted to capture damaged human vessels. Sergeant Claire Thompson and her Marines had prepared for this possibility and turned their crippled transport into a deadly trap. Instead of surrendering when outnumbered 5-1, the humans fought with savage intensity that forced the boarding party to retreat. Claire's tactics violated every rule of civilized warfare that the Zephyrians recognized. Her Marines used explosive traps and chemical weapons in the confined spaces of their own ship. They fought from positions that offered no retreat and showed no concern for their own survival as long as they could damage the enemy. The quantum disruptors continued to wreak havoc on Zephyrian systems throughout the battle. What the aliens had dismissed as primitive human technology was actually a weapon specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in their advanced electronics. Dr. Walsh had spent months analyzing the scanner data from Captain Morrison's encounter to develop this surprise. Admiral Murphy launched his reserve fleet in a coordinated assault on the now confused Zephyrian formation. His ships were still outgunned and outclassed, but the alien fleet had lost much of its tactical coordination. Human vessels attacked in wolf pack formations that concentrated firepower on single targets, then dispersed before retaliation could be organized. The Zephyrians realized they were facing something unprecedented in their long history of conquest. Humans did not fight to win in any conventional sense, but rather to inflict maximum damage regardless of cost to themselves. Every human vessel that was destroyed took alien ships with it through ramming attacks or self-destruct explosions. Kethvar attempted to restore order to his fleet, but found his communication systems still disrupted by the quantum field. Individual Zephyrian ships were fighting separate battles instead of coordinating their superior firepower. The humans had somehow turned the aliens' technological advantage against them through tactics that bordered on madness. Marine Transport New Haven was boarded by 3 separate Zephyrian assault teams, but Sergeant Thompson's defenders held them, all off through sheer ferocity. The humans had prepared their ship as a fortress and were willing to die fighting rather than be captured. The aliens had never encountered defenders who seemed to consider death preferable to surrender. The tide of battle began to turn when human engineering teams activated their final surprise. Helen Wright's converted mining equipment had been disguised as damaged debris floating near the battle zone. When Zephyrian ships moved close enough, these improvised weapons activated and began cutting through alien hulls with industrial-grade lasers. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces was devastating. They had expected to face a primitive species that would break under superior firepower, but instead found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to grow more dangerous as the battle continued. Human tactics made no sense from a logical standpoint, but proved terrifyingly effective in practice. Dr. Carter's shield technology provided one final surprise for the alien fleet. The experimental barriers that protected key human vessels could be overloaded to create massive energy discharges. Captain Rick Stone used this technique to destroy 2 Zephyrian cruisers when his own ship was surrounded and about to be captured. By the end of the first day of battle, the Zephyrian Third Fleet had lost over 40 ships to an enemy they had expected to defeat in hours. The humans had also suffered heavy losses, but showed no signs of weakening morale or willingness to continue fighting. If anything, they seemed to become more determined as their casualties mounted. Kethvar finally managed to re-establish communications with his surviving ships and ordered a tactical withdrawal to regroup. The retreat was something that had never happened before in Zephyrian military history. No primitive species had ever forced the Empire to reconsider its battle plans through sheer, stubborn resistance. As the alien fleet pulled back to assess their situation, the humans did not celebrate their temporary victory. Instead, they used the breathing space to prepare for the next assault they knew would come. Earth's defenders had learned that they could hurt their enemies, but the cost was terrible, and they were running out of ships and people to crew them. War Prime Kethvar stared at the tactical display showing Earth's major population centers and made a decision that would haunt his species forever. The humans had proven more resilient than expected, and their unpredictable tactics had cost him nearly 50 ships. It was time to break their spirit through overwhelming demonstration of Zephyrian power. The bombardment began at dawn Earth time with orbital strikes against the largest human cities. New Chicago disappeared in a ball of plasma fire that could be seen from orbit. London followed minutes later as Zephyrian dreadnoughts targeted population centers with weapons designed to crack planetary crusts. Beijing and Moscow vanished under streams of energy that turned buildings to vapor and people to ash. Colonel Andrew Bell watched the destruction of New Chicago from his command bunker and felt something break inside his chest. His wife, Sarah, and their 2 children had been visiting his parents there when the attack began. The communication networks were gone, and he knew with cold certainty that his family was dead, along with millions of other innocent people. The Zephyrian commander expected this demonstration to end human resistance, but the intercepted communications from Earth told a different story. Instead of surrender negotiations, he heard messages of grim determination and burning anger. The humans were not broken by the loss of their cities, but transformed into something far more dangerous. General Kane activated Project Retaliation from her emergency command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. This top-secret program had been prepared as humanity's final option if conventional resistance failed. Every automated factory on Earth began converting to weapons production using protocols developed by Dr. Rachel Kim and her team of industrial engineers. The transformation was breathtaking in its speed and scope. Car factories began producing armored combat vehicles within hours. Electronics plants switched to manufacturing guidance systems for missiles and bombs. Even food processing facilities were converted to produce chemical compounds needed for explosives and fuel. Dr. Gary White led teams of civilian engineers in the most ambitious reverse engineering project in human history. They had 2 months worth of sensor data from battles with Zephyrian ships and several pieces of alien technology recovered from destroyed vessels. Working around the clock, they began producing crude but functional copies of enemy weapons. The psychological impact of the city bombings had an effect opposite to what Kethvar intended. Humans who had been reluctant to support violent resistance now volunteered for the most dangerous missions available. The alien commander had turned a species of individuals into a unified force focused entirely on his destruction. Sergeant Nancy Foster assembled the most unlikely military unit in human history. Her explosives team included retired professors and teenage hackers alongside trained combat engineers. Their mission was considered impossible even by human standards, but they volunteered anyway because someone had to try. Colonel Bell personally led the infiltration mission that Nancy's team had made possible. Using information gathered from captured alien equipment, they had identified the location of Kethvar's new command ship. The plan was simple in concept, but required them to somehow board a vessel surrounded by the entire Zephyrian fleet. Lieutenant Peter Hayes monitored enemy communications and discovered something that changed everything. The Zephyrians were not just invaders, but part of a vast empire that had conquered hundreds of worlds. Their databases contained the locations of every alien colony and the identities of dozens of enslaved species who might welcome liberation. Dr. Rachel Kim's breakthrough came at exactly the right moment. Her team had successfully reverse-engineered Zephyrian faster-than-light communication technology and could now intercept messages throughout their empire. The intelligence they gathered revealed the scope of alien crimes across the galaxy and provided targeting data for future operations. The humans discovered that they were not the first species to resist Zephyrian conquest, but they were the first to inflict significant casualties on the invasion fleet. Previous rebellions had been crushed quickly through overwhelming force, but Earth's defenders had proven that the Empire was not invincible. Captain Victoria Stone broadcast her now famous message from her crippled cruiser as it drifted through the wreckage of the latest battle. Her words were recorded and transmitted throughout human space, and eventually reached the ears of enslaved aliens on distant worlds. She promised that humanity would not stop fighting until every Zephyrian was dead or the last human had died, trying. The infiltration of Kethvar's flagship began when Nancy's explosives created a breach in the alien ship's hull during a supply transfer. Colonel Bell's team had exactly 15 minutes to penetrate the vessel's defenses and reach the command center before backup arrived. They carried weapons reverse-engineered from Zephyrian technology and suicide charges in case capture seemed likely. The alien crew had never faced boarding actions before because no conquered species had ever developed the capability to threaten Zephyrian ships directly. Bell's team moved through corridors designed for creatures twice human height and fought enemies whose exoskeletons could deflect conventional bullets. The combat was brutal and personal in ways that space battles could never be. Peter Hayes cracked the alien communication codes and began downloading everything he could access from the ship's databases. The information included complete maps of the Zephyrian Empire and detailed records of their conquest methods. Most importantly, it contained the personal files of every war prime and their locations throughout known space. The mission took an unexpected turn when Bell's team discovered that Kethvar was not just a military commander, but also a war criminal responsible for the extinction of 12 species. The evidence was stored in his personal archives along with trophy recordings of planetary bombardments and mass executions. Colonel Bell found Kethvar in his command chamber and killed him with a weapon made from salvaged alien technology. The War Prime's final words were a question about why humans continued fighting when victory was impossible. Bell's answer became legendary among human forces when Peter Hayes transmitted it throughout the fleet. The successful assassination sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian fleet but did not end the battle. The aliens had backup commanders and their ships continued to function without Kethvar's direct leadership. However, the psychological impact of losing their leader to primitive humans was devastating to alien morale. Dr. White's reverse engineering teams achieved their breakthrough when they successfully modified human missiles to penetrate Zephyrian shields. The new weapons were crude compared to alien technology, but they worked well enough to level the playing field. More importantly, they proved that human ingenuity could overcome technological disadvantages. The war entered a new phase when Admiral Murphy used the intelligence from Kethvar's ship to launch strikes against Zephyrian supply lines. Human forces began targeting alien logistics vessels and communication relays instead of just fighting defensive battles. The shift to offensive operations caught the invaders completely off guard. General Kane announced the new phase of the war in a broadcast that reached every human on Earth and beyond. Humanity would no longer simply defend their homeworld, but would carry the fight to every Zephyrian colony and outpost. The aliens had wanted to see what humans were capable of, and now they would learn the answer. The surviving Zephyrian ships fled Earth's solar system in disorder after the death of War Prime Kethvar, but their escape brought no relief to the alien empire. Within weeks, human vessels began appearing at Zephyrian outposts using faster-than-light technology that should not have existed in primitive hands. Dr. Amy Carter's breakthrough in alien propulsion systems had given humanity the ability to take their war across the galaxy. Admiral Chris Murphy stood on the bridge of humanity's first interstellar warship and studied the tactical display showing Zephyrian colony Keftar. Intelligence gathered from the alien flagship revealed this world to be a mining operation using enslaved workers from 6 different conquered species. The humans had not come here to claim territory, but to deliver justice to those who had bombed Earth's cities. The liberation of Keftar shocked the Zephyrian garrison more than any military defeat could have. Captain Bobby Martinez led the assault force that destroyed the alien overseers, but instead of enslaving the population himself, he freed every worker and offered them weapons to fight their former masters. The concept of liberation without conquest was completely foreign to Zephyrian understanding. The freed aliens told stories that filled human commanders with cold rage. The Zephyrians had been conquering worlds for 3,000 years, and their methods were always the same: complete destruction of local military forces, followed by mass executions of leaders and enslavement of survivors. Entire species had been extinct or scattered across the galaxy as labor forces. Dr. Gary White's teams established production facilities on liberated worlds using a combination of human engineering and captured alien technology. The hybrid systems produced weapons and ships that surpassed original Zephyrian designs because humans were not bound by the aliens' conservative engineering traditions. Innovation, driven by desperate necessity, proved superior to millennia of stagnant technological development. The psychological warfare began when human ships started broadcasting the testimonies of liberated slaves throughout Zephyrian space. For the first time in their history, the alien empire faced an enemy that exposed their crimes to their own people. Many young Zephyrians had never known that their prosperity was built on the suffering of conquered species. Engineer Helen Wright had become humanity's leading expert on alien technology through months of studying captured equipment. Her modifications to Zephyrian weapons made them more efficient, while her defensive improvements made human ships nearly immune to conventional alien attacks. The students had surpassed their teachers through pure determination and creative thinking. The Zephyrian High Command attempted to negotiate a ceasefire when human forces reached their inner colonies, but received a response that became legendary throughout the galaxy. Human diplomat Jennifer Lewis offered terms that amounted to unconditional surrender and war crimes trials for every Zephyrian who had participated in conquest operations. There would be no peace without justice. Captain Lisa Grant commanded the human fleet that besieged the fortress world of Veftor, where the Zephyrians had concentrated their remaining military forces. The aliens expected a prolonged siege, but the humans used psychological tactics that had never been seen in galactic warfare. They broadcasted continuous messages from liberated slaves describing Zephyrian atrocities until the garrison began to surrender without fighting. The most devastating blow to Zephyrian morale came when humans began recruiting entire species that had been enslaved for generations. The Morali were master shipbuilders whose designs had been stolen by their conquerors. The Kresh were strategic geniuses who had been forced to plan campaigns for alien masters. When these species joined the human cause, they brought knowledge that turned the war into a rout. Dr. Rachel Kim's research into Zephyrian historical records revealed the true scope of their empire's crimes. The evidence included detailed documentation of 12 species driven to complete extinction and 37 others scattered across the galaxy as slave populations. The aliens had kept meticulous records of their atrocities as if they were proud achievements. Commander Steve Phillips led the final assault on the Zephyrian homeworld after a siege that lasted only 3 days. The planet's population surrendered when they realized that their military forces had abandoned them to save themselves. The humans offered terms that no Zephyrian had expected: trials for war criminals but mercy for ordinary citizens who renounced their empire. The surrender negotiations revealed the fundamental difference between human and Zephyrian thinking. The aliens had expected to be enslaved or exterminated like the species they had conquered, but instead found themselves facing judges who insisted on legal proceedings and evidence before passing sentence. This concept of justice based on individual guilt rather than collective punishment was completely alien to them. The war crimes trials began immediately after the conquest of the Zephyrian homeworld and attracted observers from every liberated species. The evidence presented was overwhelming and included the aliens' own records of their conquests. War Prime Vexnor and his surviving commanders were found guilty of genocide and crimes against entire civilizations. Human prosecutor Daniel Clark became famous throughout the galaxy for his closing argument at the trials. He explained that some crimes were so terrible that they forfeited the perpetrator's right to be remembered by history. The Zephyrian Empire would not just be defeated, but erased from all official records as the ultimate punishment for their atrocities. The dissolution of the Zephyrian Empire created a power vacuum that humans filled through liberation rather than conquest. Admiral Murphy established the Galactic Liberation Command to coordinate the freeing of enslaved populations and the reconstruction of devastated worlds. The organization became a model for interspecies cooperation based on mutual respect rather than domination. Dr. White's technology-sharing program gave formerly enslaved species the tools they needed to rebuild their civilizations and defend themselves against future threats. The knowledge that had been hoarded by Zephyrian overlords was freely distributed to anyone who requested it. This policy of open cooperation accelerated technological development throughout the galaxy. The final phase of the war involved hunting down scattered Zephyrian forces that refused to surrender and continued their slaving operations in remote regions. These remnants were systematically eliminated by joint human-alien task forces that showed no mercy to those who persisted in their crimes. The message was clear: the age of conquest and enslavement was over. General Kane established the Never Again protocols that became the foundation of galactic law under human leadership. Any species that attempted genocide or mass enslavement would face immediate intervention from the growing coalition of free worlds. The galaxy would never again tolerate the kind of empire the Zephyrians had built. The transformation was complete when the last Zephyrian military units surrendered and their surviving leaders were brought to trial. The species that had once dominated 3 star systems was scattered across the galaxy in small communities, forbidden from gathering in large numbers. Their name was systematically removed from all official records as if they had never existed. 5 years had passed since the failed invasion of Earth, and the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. Admiral Steve Phillips walked through the memorial gardens on the former Zephyrian homeworld, where representatives of 43 liberated species had gathered to commemorate the end of the empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 millennia. The world that had once been the center of the greatest conquering force in known space was now a peaceful monument to the victims of genocide and enslavement. Gardens grew where command bunkers had stood, and libraries filled with the recovered histories of extinct civilizations occupied the sites of former weapons factories. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Dr. Rachel Kim presented her Final report on Zephyrian historical records to the Galactic Council that had formed in the aftermath of the Empire's collapse. The evidence she had gathered documented crimes beyond imagination, the complete extinction of 12 intelligent species and the enslavement of 37 others over 3,000 years of systematic conquest and oppression. The trial of A. War Prime Vexnor had concluded 6 months earlier with his conviction on charges of genocide and crimes against sentient life. His final statement to the court had been a question that haunted many observers. Why had humans chosen erasure over enslavement as punishment for Zephyrian crimes when the traditional response to conquest was simply to reverse the roles of master and slave? Ambassador Carol Johnson delivered the answer that became the foundation of galactic law under human leadership. Some actions were so heinous that they forfeited the perpetrator's right to be remembered by history. The Zephyrian species would continue to exist, but their name and achievements would be systematically removed from all official records throughout the galaxy. The process of historical erasure had begun immediately after the trials ended. Every database was searched, and every reference to the conquering empire was replaced with neutral descriptions of the extinct empire or the unnamed conquerors in official documents. The goal was not to deny that the crimes had happened, but to deny the perpetrators the immortality that comes with historical notoriety. Human prosecutor Daniel Clark supervised the erasure process with meticulous attention to detail. Every star chart was updated to remove Zephyrian names from conquered worlds. Every historical record was edited to describe their victims without mentioning their oppressors by name. The empire that had once dominated 3 star systems slowly disappeared from official memory. The surviving members of the former conquering species were scattered across the galaxy in small communities limited to no more than 100 individuals. They were forbidden from using their original names or teaching their children about their imperial past. The punishment was exile from history rather than physical destruction. Dr. Gary White established the Galactic Technology Council to ensure that the scientific knowledge hoarded by the former empire was shared freely among all species. The innovations that had been used for conquest were transformed into tools for peaceful cooperation and mutual development. Knowledge became a bridge between civilizations rather than a weapon of domination. The Never-Again Protocols became the cornerstone of interstellar law under human guidance. Any species that attempted genocide or mass enslavement would face immediate intervention from the coalition of free worlds that had replaced the old empire. The galaxy would never again tolerate the rise of a conquering force based on the subjugation of other intelligent life. 25 years after the end of the war, young historian Zara L. of the liberated Morali species researched ancient galactic records for her doctoral dissertation on the fall of tyrannical empires. She found extensive documentation of liberation campaigns and war crimes trials, but noticed strange gaps in the historical record where a major empire should have been mentioned. Her research advisor, Professor Kenthal, explained the deliberate omissions when she asked about the mysterious blank spaces in galactic history. Some names had been deliberately erased as the ultimate punishment for crimes so terrible that they warranted complete removal from historical memory. The gaps themselves served as a warning to future generations about the consequences of ultimate evil. The memorial on the former imperial homeworld had become a pilgrimage site for species throughout the galaxy, but the name of the empire that had once ruled there was never spoken aloud. Visitors came to honor the memory of extinct civilizations and to pledge that such atrocities would never be permitted again. Captain Maria Santos commanded one of the patrol fleets that enforced the never-again protocols throughout the galaxy. Her ships carried representatives from dozens of species working together to prevent the rise of new conquering empires. The diversity of her crew was a living testament to the success of human liberation policies. The transformation of galactic Civilization was complete when the Galactic Council voted unanimously to adopt the empty archives as the standard punishment for crimes against entire species. The concept of erasure from history as ultimate justice had spread throughout the galaxy as civilizations realized that some punishments were more severe than death. Dr. Amy Carter's technological breakthroughs had revolutionized space travel and made possible the rapid response forces that maintained galactic peace. Her faster-than-light communication networks allowed coordination between species across vast distances and ensured that no world would face conquest alone, as Earth once had. The education systems of liberated worlds taught their children about the importance of freedom and cooperation, but the name of the empire that had once enslaved their ancestors was never mentioned. Students learned about liberation and justice without learning the names of the tyrants who had made such lessons necessary. 50 years after the war ended, the last human veterans gathered for their final reunion on Earth. Admiral Murphy and General Kane were among the few survivors who remembered the desperate early days when humanity faced extinction at alien hands. They had lived to see their species become the guardians of galactic freedom. The reunion included representatives from every species that had been liberated during the war, and many offered tributes to human courage and determination. But the most meaningful tribute was the silence where the name of humanity's first galactic enemy should have been spoken. The erasure was so complete that younger generations did not even know what name had been forbidden. The final entry in the Galactic Historical Archives simply stated that humanity had faced their first interstellar war against an aggressive empire that no longer existed in any meaningful sense. The victory had established human leadership in galactic affairs and created the foundation for a civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. And so the last species to anger humans had. Their name spoken never again existing only as a cautionary tale in the gaps between the stars. The empty spaces in galactic history served as an eternal warning that some mistakes were so grave they resulted not just in death, but in the complete erasure of one's legacy from the cosmos. The silence spoke louder than any monument ever could, about the price of awakening human anger and the terrible justice that followed those who chose genocide over peace.